At 60, I was in a car accident, and my daughter Luna decisively gave up on trying to save me. Only as I was dying did I learn that Blake's wealthy father was actually my biological father. The parents who had beaten and scolded me my whole life were Blake's real parents. My wife Sophia Taylor had lived in luxury with Blake for decades. My grandson Leo, whom I had raised with my own hands, spun around excitedly. Old man's death was so worth it. The driver paid $1.5 million. Now I've got enough pocket money to study abroad. My blood pressure spiked through the roof, and the last of my consciousness was swallowed by darkness. When I opened my eyes again, I was reborn on the day I proposed to Sophia. Ethan, what are you dazing at? A slap landed on the back of my head. I blinked and regained awareness. The red-faced big man in front of me looked oddly familiar. Young man, you look a lot like my company commander when he was young. Before I could finish, the red-faced man slapped my forehead again and, laughing and scolding in a booming voice, said, "You little bastard, how dare you take advantage of me?" I suddenly realized and sat there dumbstruck, pupils trembling. The man before me truly was my Captain Marcus, and he was not even 30. I raised my slightly trembling hand. The arms before me were solid and strong, unlike in my deathbed, when my fingers' knuckles were deformed by overwork and rheumatism. This was a young man's body. This was my 25-year-old self. Marcus didn't notice my days. He simply turned his head and kept smoking. "You're stubborn. You insisted on staying in service just for Sophia. Now they're building the Southern Overseas Economic Zone. If you come south with me to take a risk, you'll have a future." I remember clearly. That year Marcus retired and changed careers, while I was eager to retire and return home to propose to Sophia. We said our last goodbyes at that restaurant and went our separate ways. 10 years later, the company Marcus founded successfully listed overseas. He invited me again to head south and make a career. At that time, I was crushed by marital troubles and listless. That same year, Sophia left me, claiming illness, and went abroad with her first love, Blake, never returning. I didn't even know which country she'd gone to. Looking at the empty home and 10-year-old Luna crying for her mother, I stopped heading south once more. To take care of Luna, I stayed and worked at the local factory and eventually lost that job. From then on, I made a living selling foreign street crepes on the city streets and alleyways, raised Luna, and sent her to university. Just as I was starting to breathe easy, bad news came again. 20-year-old Luna became pregnant out of wedlock at university and stubbornly refused to say who the father was. No matter who asked, she would next stiffen and insist it was for love. I couldn't stand it any longer and finally gave Luna a hard slap. That slap made her resent me for more than a decade. Even though afterwards I bought her a house and looked after the child, she never showed me a kind face again. Looking back on that life, I was really pathetic. I had hustled my whole life without knowing what for. I took a deep breath and shook the shameful memories from my mind. "Captain Marcus, I've thought it over. I'll go south with you." I tilted my head back, downed a cup of fiery white liquor, and said decisively, "There was the sound of a heavy object falling at the restaurant door." I turned to see Linda standing outside, face full of shock and doubt, a bag of apples spilled at her feet. "Ethan, what are you doing?" "Going south." Linda's brows shot up. She was about to scold me out of habit. But unexpectedly, I turned my head away calmly, as if I didn't even see her. Linda grew anxious and hurried over to grab my arm. "Didn't you say yesterday you want to take care of Sophia for the rest of your life?" Her eyes bulged and her voice carried contempt. "What can you two ex-soldiers do down south? You really think you can get rich? Dream on." Marcus's face didn't change. I brushed Linda's hand away and said calmly, "I figured it out. Sophia doesn't like me. There's no point staying in the old home. I'd rather go out and try my luck. Try to luck my foot." Linda's voice shot up 8 notes. She looked at me as if I were an enemy. "You aren't going anywhere. You will obediently marry Sophia, or I'll have George beat you to death. You heartless thing." Since childhood, George would thrash me until I nearly died. Breaking a wooden broomstick a month was routine. Linda never stopped him. At most she'd smile and say, Don't beat him into a cripple. We can't afford to feed a cripple. As a child, I foolishly thought that as long as I behaved and did any work, my parents would someday love me. Yet even on their deathbeds, they were still scolding me for being useless and not being able to take them to the big city for treatment. Especially Linda. Near death, she kept staring at the ward door and murmuring, "Carter." The truth Sophia told me before dying in my previous life echoed in my ears. The parents I had supported my whole life were Blake's biological parents. So what Linda kept muttering at the end was actually the surname Carter. I sprang to my feet and looked at Linda. I cannot marry Sophia. Not in this life. Marcus, surprised, glanced my way a few times and smiled. Linda didn't expect my attitude to change overnight. Furious, she pointed at me. "Have you looked in a mirror? Sophia, being interested in you is your good fortune." She shoved past me, ran outside the restaurant, dropped to the pavement, and began pounding the ground and wailing loudly. "I failed the tailors. That scoundrel Ethan got Sophia pregnant, and now he wants to run away. Irresponsible. Who will stand up for Sophia? I can't control that bastard Ethan." Reborn into a second life, I finally understood that Linda's habitual curses, calling me a scoundrel and bastard, came straight from her heart. Her own son was raised in privilege by a high official, while the official's biological son was humiliated and scolded from childhood. In this life, Linda derived the utmost spiritual satisfaction from me. Marcus couldn't stand it and slammed the table to get up, but I held him down. I went outside the restaurant and watched Linda coldly as she thundered but didn't strike. Her commotion naturally attracted many neighbors. More and more people began pointing and whispering about me. Never thought it. Ethan always looked honest, even served in the army. Turns out he's a scoundrel. You never know a person. He followed Sophia around since he was little. Who knew when he'd get his chance? Exactly. Aunt Linda is his birth mother. Would she falsely accuse him? Hearing the crowd bolstered her confidence. She dusted herself off and said in measured tones, "I'm laying it out today. If you dare not marry Sophia, I'll take her to the police and report you. I've checked. Charges of insult carry heavy sentences. Trying to run? Not so easy." I stared at Linda. There wasn't an ounce of maternal love in her eyes, only the pleasure of having me under her control. Perhaps she had maternal feelings, but they were never for me. I raised an eyebrow and, in a louder voice, asked, "Aunt Linda, you say Sophia is pregnant? How many months has it been?" Linda snorted coldly. "Don't you dare ask me about your own shameless actions. Sophia is 2 months pregnant." I lowered my head and laughed softly, then looked up and laughed out loud. The passers-by at first stared at me as if I were insane, but more and more people gradually realized what was happening and turned to look at Linda with odd expressions. Marcus had come up behind me at some point and joined in the laughter. Linda's face went a sickly mix of blue and white from my laughter. She stood up angrily, hands on her hips, and yelled, "What are you laughing at? Come look, this is someone who left the army. How could there be a person like this?" Marcus's expression hardened. He glared at Linda coldly. "Ma'am, you're spreading rumors about your own son, and you want to invent things about the unit as well. Watch out. I'll sue you for defamation." He stepped in front of me and, with authority rather than anger, glanced around. "I'm Captain Marcus from Ethan's unit. He only retired with me last week. Before that, anytime Ethan wanted to leave the unit, he had to file a report with me. Otherwise, the unit simply wouldn't let him out. I can stake my life on this. Ethan hasn't left the barracks once in the past 6 months." Marcus had been enlisted for 10 years and had served on overseas peacekeeping missions. The aura of severity about him was something ordinary people couldn't fake. His words carried an inherent weight that made people believe him. The neighbors instantly erupted. That's right. My sister works at Jing City train station. She saw Ethan only last week. Sophia is 2 months pregnant. How could he be the father? Aunt Linda must be losing her mind, right?" Linda hadn't expected things to turn out this way. The smugness on her face shifted to panic. Her face flushed red as she hurriedly waved to those around her. "I was mistaken. Sophia isn't 2 months along. she's only been pregnant a week. Yes, she got pregnant when Ethan came back. A middle-aged woman in the crowd spat. I'm saying, Miller family, you'd rather your son wear a green hat, huh? Which girl's pregnancy shows up after just a week? Did you crawl on her belly and look? The onlookers burst into laughter. The hostile looks that had been directed at me a moment ago had all but vanished. Linda, blushing and avoiding eye contact, turned away. Her eyes shifted and she immediately changed tactics, forcing out a couple of tears for me. Ethan, I'm doing this for your own good. You've liked Sophia since you were young, haven't you? Now she's willing to marry you. Why won't you accept? Such a fine girl. If you let her go, there won't be another like her. In my previous life, she never begged me like this. In that life, I've been bewitched by Sophia. After retiring, I stayed in my hometown to pursue her, and unexpectedly she agreed to marry me very quickly. Happiness came so suddenly that I lost my judgment. Linda joyfully welcomed Sophia into our home, fussing over her with every care. George told Sophia that if I ever treated her badly, he'd break my legs. I, foolishly smiling, was even touched and thought my parents' kindness to Sophia stemmed from love for me. Only when Sophia's belly rapidly showed did I realize something was wrong. We had been married only 2 months. How could she already be showing? Although the military is strict, I knew at least that a 2-month pregnancy isn't visible. Sophia couldn't hide it from me any longer and broke down, saying she had been drugged and assaulted, and to this day, she didn't know who the perpetrator was. Ethan, you say you love me. Can't you even protect me? I did love her, and learning she'd been hurt only made me more determined to take care of her. What surprised me pleasantly was that my parents had no qualms about Sophia being pregnant before marriage. Linda even doted on her, as if she were her own daughter. I stupidly thought it was because my parents loved me that they didn't mind. The baby was born 7 months after the wedding, weighing a full 7 gene, and the whole family told outsiders it was a premature birth. Luna binding me and dragging me down marked the beginning of the rest of my life. Starting over from scratch this life, I refused to be a patsy again. I looked up at the neighbors on the street, speaking neither too loud nor too soft, just enough for everyone to hear. I did like Sophia once, but that was in the past. I don't like her anymore, and there's no way I'd happily become a dad. Uncles, don't look down on Sophia. Because of this, help her out a bit. Maybe the father of her child is someone important. Linda's face went pale at my words. She immediately gave my arm a hard squeeze. Stop talking nonsense. What important person? She pinched my arm hard and urged me in a low voice to hurry home. Don't ruin Sophia's reputation. We'll talk about this at home. I gave Marcus a look. He nodded slightly and didn't stop me. Marcus stayed at the Beijing guest house on standby while I went home with Linda. The red brick bungalow from my memories appeared before me. A classic foreign-style women's bicycle was parked at our door. I froze. It was Sophia's bicycle. Last year when I went home visiting, I had used my saved wages to buy it for her, the most expensive women's bike in the mall. Linda brightened and tugged me to hurry. Sophia's in the house. What are you dawdling for? Go apologize to her. I shook off Linda's hand and followed her slowly into the house. George sat in the cane chair with a stern face drinking tea. When he saw me, he glared at me. Sophia's been waiting for you for ages. Getting married and you're still so irresponsible, good for nothing. Not far from him, Sophia sat quietly in a white dress, her expression cool and distant. In my previous life, I adored this noble, aloof look of hers. I always thought even the moon goddess Chang'e couldn't surpass her. Sorry, Chang'e, I was blind, brain full of cow dung. It seemed they hadn't learned about the street scene earlier. Linda, feeling guilty, of course didn't dare bring it up. I looked at Sophia. She frowned slightly and looked over as if holding back something filthy, coughing lightly. We agreed. After marriage, I won't do housework. Washing, cooking, and caring for the child are your responsibilities. My salary is mine, and your salary must be handed over to me. From now on, all benefits your workplace gives belong to me. After my discharge, I was supposed to be assigned to a fairly profitable factory. In this era, it would have been a decent placement. Unfortunately, with the tide of the times, that factory eventually closed and went bankrupt. In my last life, I lost my job because of that. This time around, there was no way I would go work at that factory again. Sophia looked around my family's house and, with a hint of making do, said, "Remember to transfer the house to me tomorrow." That was no ordinary request. If I wanted the house, George could have picked up a stick and beaten me to death on the spot. Yet George and Linda exchanged a glance, hesitated for a moment, and then made up their minds. "Fine. As long as you'll marry in, Sophia, this home will be yours to run." I smiled faintly. Before, I didn't understand why my parents held Sophia in such high regard and secretly rejoiced that it must be for my sake. Now I understood. The old couple's whole heart was set on the life from the Miller family inside Sophia's belly. Not only was that the biological grandson they longed for, but the child's father was also being raised in the richest man's household. As long as they had this child, they would be secured for the rest of their lives. Once Blake made it big, what was a house worth? It was just a pity that in the previous life when Sophia and Blake left together, the two took all the family's savings and left not a cent for the elderly couple, not even a penny for Luna. Even so, when George and Linda were gravely ill, they couldn't bring themselves to scold Blake and Sophia. All the curses fell on me. This time, let their whole family live in harmony and love. Linda, seeing that I didn't say anything, hastily clapped with joy. "Sophia, look how happy Ethan is." George smoked in the yard and snorted. With his wimpy look, "He can even marry Sophia? Why wouldn't he be happy?" Sophia took a sip of tea. Her cold face showed not a hint of a smile. She stood and instructed me. "I heard your discharge allowance includes a considerable sum in dollars. Go to the bank tomorrow and withdraw it all, and give it to me." Hearing this, Linda's smile faltered. Last night, she had also wanted me to hand over the discharge allowance to her for safekeeping. Now she really wouldn't get a penny. Sophia's eyes flicked, and she curled her lips meaningfully. "Don't forget, I'm going to bear children for your old Miller family in the future." Linda's expression changed again, delight returning to her face. Her shrewd eyes glanced at Sophia's belly. Then she turned to scold me. "Are you mute? Nod quickly. You don't have to wait until tomorrow. Go to the bank with Sophia this afternoon." I stood up and looked at the three people before me. No need to make such a fuss. Whoever wants to marry Sophia can marry her. I won't marry her anyway. George's cigarette but fell to the ground without him noticing. Linda's smile froze and a trace of panic appeared. Sophia widened her eyes in disbelief, then gave a helpless, light laugh. "Ethan, plays like playing hard to get won't work. If any one of those conditions just now can't be met, don't even think about bringing me into your home." I looked at her in surprise. "You're young. Are your ears bad?" I said, "I don't want to marry you." The last sentence was almost shouted, carrying decades of resentment from my past life. "You bastard. What are you talking about?" George swung a wooden broom at me with fierce force. I reached out, firmly grabbed the flying broom, and with a gentle pull took it into my hands. George staggered back, barely regaining his footing, his face flushed and throat thick with anger as he glared. "You dog, how dare you dodge?" Startled, Linda quickly stood and shouted, "Ethan, you've got some nerve. Stand still and take a few hits from your father. What's the big deal?" I furrowed my brow and looked at the couple in front of me. I hadn't met Blake many times, but few people in Jing City didn't know him. That young man who used to ride around the streets in a leather jacket on a classic foreign motorcycle was Mr. Richard Carter's son, Blake, the richest man's son in Jing City. Now it was clear why Blake's brows and eyes were very similar to Linda's, and his thick eyebrows matched George's as if cast from the same mold. I finally understood why classmates had always said I didn't look like my parents. "What are you staring at me for?" "Apologize to Sophia quickly." George fumed, still pointing at my nose and yelling. I glanced lightly at Sophia. The haughty look she always wore showed a few more traces of shock. Her sycophants who followed her since childhood must find it hard to adjust to suddenly being treated differently. I smiled, tossed the broom out the door, and chuckled. "Uncle George go ask around outside." Aunt Linda's been making a scene on the street, shouting that Sophia is 2 months pregnant. What? You two old folks really want me to wear a green hat? Linda's face went pale, and she glanced awkwardly at Sophia. Sophia's complexion immediately drained. She clutched her lower belly, still forcing herself to look calm, but she didn't smile at Linda. George was momentarily struck dumb, then glared at me. So what if she is? If Sophia is willing to marry you, you should be thanking the heavens. What green hat nonsense. Don't bring it up again. I marveled. The Millers really kept surprising me. There's no way the child in her belly is mine. Why should I marry her? You expect me to be a sucker? I won't. Sophia's eyes filled with humiliation. She bit her lip with tears in her eyes and looked at me, but remained silent. Whatever she wanted to say, she couldn't, and George and Linda spoke for her. Linda stood and, forcing a conciliatory tone, tried to persuade me. Child, why are you butting heads with your father? Your father only has your best interests at heart. If Sophia marries you, you'll have a child in a few months. What a wonderful thing. I quickly raised my hand to stop her. With strict foreign population control policies now, if I marry her, I won't be able to have my own children. How is that for my good? I looked, half smiling, at my somewhat guilty-looking parents. If Uncle George never has his own kids and can only raise someone else's, would he be willing to accept that? Linda flushed and glared at me, shouting, "You're talking nonsense." George trembled with anger, searching for a wooden broom. Heavens! How dare you curse me to have no sons? I'll beat you to death today. I lifted my long leg to block the door and helpfully reminded him. You're confused again. You're the one insisting I marry Sophia and accept the fatherless child in her womb. That way our family line would be ended. Like a cat with its tail stepped on, Linda picked up a metal cup and hurled it at me. Your family will be the one ended. Your entire family. I tilted my head and dodged, looking at her in surprise. Aunt Linda, isn't my family your family too? George and Linda snapped to attention and exchanged a look. George's eyes were full of complaint, while Linda seemed to want to cover her mouth in shame. Sophia, having held it in until now, finally couldn't anymore. She spoke softly. Ethan, can we talk alone? Even now, her expression toward me remained distant, as if a celestial beauty looking down scornfully at an insect. In my past life, I would have been delighted by that. How pathetic I had been. There weren't yet the ubiquitous cafes that would appear decades later, so I ended up at a small noodle shop on a corner in Jing City, ordered a bowl, and sat in the main room to talk with Sophia. She looked around uneasily, and annoyance showed unmistakably in her eyes. Couldn't we go somewhere with a private room? She asked. I, stubborn as ever, didn't budge. No money. The main room's cheaper. If she wanted fancy, she could go to Blake. I'm not serving that. Sophia's fair face tightened with anger. All her life she'd been used to my compliance and couldn't stand my indifference now. She sighed faintly, as if looking at a sulking child. Ethan, what are you still unhappy about? I've agreed. Can't that be enough? We'll register our marriage tomorrow. There was 5 parts condescension, 3 parts reluctance, and 2 parts superiority in Sophia's expression. You know, if this were before, I would never have married you. The implication was clear. Letting me become a father was a favor. I should be grateful. I lowered my head and noisily slurped my noodles, giving her this silent treatment. Only when the bowl was scraped clean did I belch contentedly. It was becoming difficult for Sophia to maintain her noble expression. Ethan, what do you really want? I looked up smiling. I want a few of Blake's hairs. Sophia's face changed drastically and her gaze drifted aside. Are you crazy? How could I possibly get Blake's hair? Without another word, I stood up and left. Wait. Sophia couldn't contain herself, but she had no idea what I intended to do. If I give you Blake's hair, you'll marry me? In this era, having a child out of wedlock was a scandal. Blake was the hope of the richest couple and could never marry her. Sophia's confidence that I would be the cuckold to take over was on the verge of collapse. Of course she was anxious. I watched her expressionlessly. I want to see you pull the hair out of his head with your own eyes, with the follicle intact. Sophia gritted her teeth. It's settled then. The next day was the weekend. Sophia arranged to meet Blake at Central Park in the capital city. In the bustling park, Blake openly held Sophia in his arms and kissed her. I sat lazily on the lawn across, wearing sunglasses, watching as if I were watching a live sex scene, with me looming there like such a giant third wheel. The smile on Sophia's face was a little stiff. Getting carried away, Blake felt something and tried to leave, taking Sophia's hand. I sneered and shook my head at Sophia. She bit her lip and suddenly plucked a few hairs from Blake's head. Blake winced in pain, pushed Sophia forcefully, cursed her a few times in annoyance, and walked off. I approached Sophia. She glared at me with tear-red eyes and, in a bad mood, shoved a handful of hairs into my hand. "It's your fault. What's wrong with you? Why do you have to want someone else's hair?" Sophia hurried after Blake. From under the bench where they had been sitting, I dragged out a woven bag, took out an old tape recorder, and switched the recording button off. Back at the guest house, Marcus and I listened to the tape together. "Ethan still doesn't want to marry you? Letting him be the live cuckold is his honor." Blake's voice came through, full of disdain. "Don't worry, I'll sweet-talk him a bit. He's listened to me like a dog since childhood," Sophia said coldly. "You better be careful not to hurt my seed. By the way, are you sure the child in your belly is mine?" Blake said with a careless laugh. Sounds of hitting came from the tape. Sophia scolded, "Blake, you bastard. Ethan hasn't even touched a single hair of mine." "Hang on, baby. My mom, Margaret Carter, has cancer. When she dies in a few years and no one stops you from coming in, I'll marry you." The two flirted and bantered. Marcus and I grew increasingly displeased. Mrs. Richard Carter, in the previous life, died 10 years later. It was precisely the time when Sophia divorced me and remarried Blake. "Why do your parents insist on you marrying that woman? They'd rather abandon their own grandson than have you raise someone else's child? Isn't that sick?" Marcus frowned, sensing something was wrong. I smiled coldly. Guess I was picked out of the trash. I had just retired and didn't have much luggage. I had already put everything I needed in the guest house these past few days. Early the next morning, I bought a train ticket with Marcus and headed straight south. I made a copy of that tape and anonymously mailed it to Mr. Richard Carter. As for how Sophia would deal with the child in her belly, that was none of my business. I never agreed to marry her in this life. The process of starting a business down south wasn't smooth. Marcus came up with several startup ideas, but none took off. In the end, I strongly supported him in electronic components. In the previous life, Marcus made his fortune in that industry, went on to list the company overseas, and achieved a market capitalization of tens of billions of dollars. This time my reminder just helped him get there a bit earlier. Marcus was daring and driven, with far more guts than most. He generously gave me 20% of the shares. Finally, I had a place in his future business empire. Having Captain Marcus to carry me along was incredibly satisfying. After making our first pot of gold, because we were near Harbor City, I sent Blake's hair along with George's and Linda's to Harbor City for overseas paternity testing. In this era, paternity tests were rare on the mainland, but were becoming available in Harbor City. If you had the money, you could get it done. A few days later, the results were back. The probability that Blake was the biological son of Mr. and Mrs. Miller was 99.9999%. 2 years after heading south, I returned to my hometown. This time I didn't go back to that so-called home. I booked a room at the best hotel in the center of Jing City. I took off my bespoke suit and put on a plain cotton jacket, then strolled toward the Miller's residence. From the familiar red brick bungalow came the cries of a young child, and a row of diapers was hanging out to dry in the yard. So even though I ran off, Sophia still chose to have the baby at the Miller's home. "Sophia, the baby is hungry. Aren't you going to feed her?" Linda's loud voice was still as penetrating as ever. But her attitude toward Sophia didn't seem as obsequious as before. Standing outside the gate, Linda's complaints were clearly audible. Waiting, and she gives us a girl for the Millers. Now, I have to look after you? Bad luck. Sophia's mocking voice came from inside. What's wrong with the girl? If you won't raise her, then give back the living expenses you send every month in US dollars. Linda immediately began to shout and slam things. Dream on. That money is my son Blake's. The quarrel went on inside, and I curved my lips into a smile outside. How long had Blake known about his origins to have pushed pregnant Sophia onto me, then kept his real parents and his illegitimate daughter under wraps and supported them all? In my past life, unaware, I worked diligently, handed over all my wages, and often lived on leftover rice and a little pickled vegetable. I was a slave to that family my whole life. Isn't that Ethan? When did you get back? A passerby spotted me and loudly called out. The noise inside the Miller yard stopped at once. Linda hurried out and, seeing me, burst into a tirade with red-rimmed eyes. You bastard, you still know to come back. Why didn't you die out there? Sophia gave you a daughter, so get in there and tend to them. I never expected Linda would still try to force me to accept being a father. Stop. I dodged Linda's nonsense. The child Sophia isn't mine at all. If you want to take care of her, go ahead, but don't drag me into it. I shot back loudly. The neighbors looked bewildered. Then their expressions shifted to sympathy. Oh my, are you saying Sophia didn't have the pregnancy terminated? Aunt Linda says her granddaughter was conceived by you before you left. Only she was born prematurely. Of course, there was nothing the Millers couldn't do, only things I couldn't imagine. Sophia appeared at the door holding a little girl who was sobbing, her face full of grievance. Ethan, I know you hated that I looked down on you before, but you can't refuse to acknowledge your own daughter. If you do, are you still even human? I didn't get angry. I laughed instead and pulled out a tiny tape recorder, pressing play. You better be careful, don't hurt my seed. By the way, are you sure the baby in your belly is mine? Blake, you bastard! Ethan hasn't so much as touched a hair on my head. To guard against Sophia's slander, I always carried that recording with me. Sophia and Linda both went pale. The neighbors pricked up their ears and listened to the looped recording, then exchanged looks of sudden understanding. I knew it. I used to see Sophia and Blake together every day. How could she suddenly have a child with Ethan? Isn't Blake engaged to some businessman's daughter? No wonder they'd shove Sophia onto Ethan. TSK. I still don't get what the Millers are after, forcing Ethan to accept a child that's not even their own. Sophia couldn't bear everyone's stares and fled inside with the child. Linda's face flickered between green and white. She rolled her eyes and collapsed on the ground. Ethan, you unfilial wretch. I'm dizzy, my head hurts. The crowd, unsurprised, dispersed. I turned and left without mercy. Linda continued to cry and curse after me. After all these years, I raised a thankless ingrate like you. So unfilial. No wonder you've been out there for years without money to buy new clothes. Good. If they knew I now had some assets, that family would be even less likely to let me go. Not long after I returned to the hotel, a group of plainclothes police with stern faces knocked on my door. You're Ethan, right? Someone reported you for deliberately extorting and threatening them. I stayed calm. I half expected they'd come for me. At the Public Security Bureau, I was interrogated not only by the police, but also by a dignified, graying man. The richest man in Jing City, Mr. Richard Carter. And standing behind him with a sullen expression was Blake. Ethan, you secretly recorded my conversation with Sophia. That's an invasion of privacy. Do you know that's a crime? Before the police or Mr. Carter could speak, Blake had already barked. I smiled indifferently and ignored Blake, instead looking at Mr. Richard Carter. Mr. Carter, is your wife, Mrs. Margaret, in good health now? Mr. Carter pursed his lips and stared at me, then said in a deep voice, That's none of your concern. Now speak. What exactly is your aim? I stretched a little and said, What aim could I have? I just don't want to raise Blake's mistress and child for him. Those words made the officers exchange glances, and Mr. Carter shot Blake a fierce look. Blake's aura instantly wilted, and he timidly said, Dad, a woman like Sophia, who knows whose child she's carrying? There's no way I can acknowledge it. When he said this, there was a hint of reluctance on his face, but more of a firm resolve. After all, he was about to marry the entrepreneur's daughter. In my previous life, that marriage lasted 5 years and brought him countless benefits. I raise an eyebrow. This is a simple matter. I can help you. Facing everyone's gaze, I very kindly explained to them the technical sophistication of overseas paternity testing. Mr. Richard Carter seemed dazed. He spoke gravely. If the test really shows it's a child of the Carter family, then indeed we can't let you be wronged. Blake's face changed drastically in the corner, and he stared at me with something close to terror. Dad, don't believe his lies. Paternity tests are just his excuse because he doesn't want to acknowledge that bastard's kid. I let out a snore of laughter. Insulting his own biological daughter as a bastard. That's truly Blake. No wonder in my past life Blake took Sophia away, but left Luna with me. He really didn't dare be sure whether Luna was his own child. I didn't know whether to praise him for his devotion to Sophia or condemn him for his cruelty toward Luna. The police at the side brought over a forensic specialist from the Public Security Bureau who muttered for a long time before saying seriously, Mr. Carter, the overseas paternity testing technique Ethan mentioned does indeed exist and is highly accurate, but our city doesn't have the capability or technology for it. Hearing that, Blake quietly breathed a sigh of relief. Dad, don't waste time arguing with him. Just convict him quickly. Insult, extortion, any charge will do. Blake grew more agitated as he spoke. Richard Carter's face grew colder and colder. Then suddenly he stood up and slapped Blake hard across the face. Shut your mouth. He was so angry his face turned ashen. Abusing your position to settle personal scores. How could your mother and I have produced something like you? Blake clutched his face and bowed his head, a flash of viciousness passing through his eyes. I saw it and decided to pour on more fuel. Mr. Carter, I rarely get the chance to meet someone of your status. Here's a small gift. Please accept it. Mr. Carter didn't even look and immediately waved his hand. No need. If it turns out you were wrong today, I will personally apologize to you. I took from my chest the paternity report of the Miller couple and Blake and placed it in front of Mr. Richard Carter. He took it with unsettled suspicion and opened it. Then he stood there motionless for a long time, his hands trembling nonstop. I stood there expressionless and didn't move. The gift I was giving could not be taken back. The paternity test in Harbor City was only the fuse. How Mr. Carter later formally confirmed through which institution that Blake was not his biological son, I don't know. All I know is that the Carter family soon filed a report demanding a thorough investigation into who had switched their biological son more than 20 years ago. Blake's engagement to the entrepreneur's daughter was quickly annulled. The whole of Jing City turned its attention to this infant swap case. After so many years, it was originally hard to investigate. But unfortunately for Blake, the unusually frequent contact between him and the Miller couple soon drew the police's attention. Mr. Richard Carter's gaze finally came to rest on me. He brought his ailing wife, Mrs. Margaret, and personally came to ask for my consent to do a paternity test with him. Looking at that emaciated yet hopeful woman, how could I possibly refuse? A week later, Mrs. Margaret came with the DNA test results and held me as she cried until she fainted. Mr. Richard Carter's eyes were wet, but he still tentatively asked me, Child, will you acknowledge us? I held my mother, and the tears that had been bottled up for 2 generations finally poured out. How could I not acknowledge them? They were my biological parents. I had finally found my life again. After detailed questioning by the police, Linda, terrified, finally confessed that years ago she had begged a nurse friend at the hospital to swap her son with the child of the evidently well-off Carter couple. But I always treated Ethan like my own son and doted on him. He hasn't gone hungry as long as I had food. Have some conscience. Mother had just recovered a bit when Linda's specious arguments almost made her faint again. She saw with her own eyes the scars on my body from the wooden broom that had struck me since childhood. Guilt and anger nearly worsened her condition. I did not intervene further in the subsequent trial. I heard the Millers were each sentenced to 10 years. Blake also moved out of the Carter house and went to live with Sophia in the Millers' red brick bungalow. When I passed that bungalow again, unsurprisingly, I heard their constant arguing and the terrified cries of a child. Sophia called Blake useless and spineless. Blake called Sophia promiscuous and unclean. Even then, he didn't believe the child was his daughter. Later, Blake stole all of the Miller's money and vanished without a trace. Sophia suffered such a blow that she went mad, smashing dishes or taking her anger out on the child. This time, Luna lived with her biological mother. Her fate was no longer my concern. I took my mother south to Harbor City to seek renowned overseas physicians to extend her life. After precise overseas surgery and multiple sessions of advanced chemotherapy abroad, my mother made it through a 5-year survival period, her complexion growing rosy. She could climb to the 6th floor without losing her breath. The Reed and Johnson company that Marcus and I co-founded was listed overseas 2 years ahead of schedule. On the day the company went public, while I was walking down the street, I suddenly heard the sound of a car flooring the accelerator. Exactly the same sound as in my previous life at age 60. I nimbly vaulted over the railing of Jing City Avenue, leapt up onto the roadside viewing platform, and came face to face with the driver who was barreling toward me. In the cab, Blake's eyes were bloodshot and wild. He screamed, "Everything of yours is mine." I calmly leapt aside and let Blake ram the car into the concrete viewing platform. Flames and an explosion erupted at once. Bystanders fled in panic. Amid the roaring fire, I watched expressionlessly as Blake struggled and burned to a charred death. The shadow of my past life was finally closed.